Welcome back, students. After learning the infratemporal fossa here, we will now learn the Pterygopalatine fossa. We will learn the Pterygopalatine fossa, which is situated deep to the pterygomaxillary fissure. We have already learned about the pterygomaxillary fissure, and deep to it is the Pterygopalatine fossa is situated. Now, this Pterygopalatine fossa is a very small pyramidal shape structure whose apex is directed downward and base is upward. So, its shape is pyramidal, it is small, and it is situated below the apex of the apex where this optic canal is opening. So, it is situated below the apex of the orbit, okay, orbit, and deep to the pterygomaxillary fissure. Okay. Most of the boundaries of this fissure, fossa, Pterygopalatine fossa, will not be visible, okay, because it is deeply located. So just note down what are the structures which will form the boundaries of the Pterygopalatine fossa. The anterior boundary. Let us come first. An anterior boundary is same as was the anterior boundary of the infratemporal fossa. That means the posterior surface of the maxilla. So this is the posterior surface of the body of the maxilla, and this is going also to form deep. If you will look deep inside, this is extending deep inside the Pterygopalatine fossa. Thus it is forming the anterior boundary of this small space, the Pterygopalatine fossa. Let us come to the posterior boundary. And posterior boundary, where I am just putting my wire, tip of the wire, if you can see here, tip of the wire is there. This is the posterior wall. And this posterior wall is the root of the pterygoid process. This is the lateral pterygoid process. So it is the root of the pterygoid process which will form the posterior wall more laterally, but more medially. If you will just see, it is the anterior surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid. So the anterior surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid and the root of the pterygoid process, they form the posterior wall of this Pterygopalatine fossa. Now medial wall. Medial wall is deeply situated and it is formed by the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone. Okay, if I am passing my wire inside this is touching to the medial wall. This is the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone, and this perpendicular plate of the palatine bone can be seen on this surface also, that is from the nasal surface. This is the medial pterygoid plate you are seeing, this is the lateral pterygoid plate, and just in front of this root of the pterygoid plates, if you see this bone here, okay, this bone here is the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone, and this plate here is the horizontal plate of the palatine bone, and this is at right angle is the perpendicular plate of the palatine bone, which will form the medial wall of this fissure. Okay, see, this is, I will show you from this side also. This is that perpendicular plate, this is the medial pterygoid plate, perpendicular plate of the palatine bone, and this through the fissure, if I just pass my wire, it is the perpendicular, but at the upper end, where there is a presence of a foramina, that is the sphenopalatine foramina, and this sphenopalatine foramina is at the upper border of the perpendicular plate, and a wire will come into the nose. If you can see my wire coming inside the nasal cavity, going inside. Okay, I will just try to pass it from here in the, yes, it has come here. You can see here this wire coming. Okay, this is in the sphenopalatine foramina. That means this medial wall of the Pterygopalatine fossa, it will show a foramina, that is the sphenopalatine foramina. Okay, I hope you are able to see it. This wire which is moving here in the nasal cavity. Just if you can zoom it little, hope that then you will be able to see. Now I have put the light on this. Okay, so this was the medial wall of that small pyramidal shape space, the pterygopalatine fossa. Lateral wall. After learning anterior wall, posterior wall and medial wall, let us come to the lateral wall of this fossa. There is no lateral wall of this fossa, okay? It is open and it communicates this with that of the infratemporal fossa. It communicates with the infratemporal fossa and through the fissure that is called as pterygomaxillary fissure. So on the lateral side it is open and communicates with the infratemporal fossa through the pterygomaxillary fissure, okay, pterygo. And through this fissure will pass the maxillary, third part of the maxillary artery, the maxillary nerve and vessels. They will pass through this fissure inside the pterygopalatine fossa, inside the pterygopalatine fossa. So this pterygomaxillary fissure is a triangular in shape. As I said, apex is directed downward and base. So this fissure is triangular in shape between the maxilla and pterygoid process. And I said that it transmits the third part of the maxillary artery, maxillary nerve and maxillary vein. Okay. After this lateral wall, let us come to see the roof of the pterygo, which is again not seen, okay, roof, but medially it is bounded by the body of the sphenoid. The body of the sphenoid will form the roof in the medial most part, while laterally this roof will communicate with that of the infratemporal fissure, okay. This will communicate with the infraorbital, not temporal, infraorbital fissure, where I am passing my wire. You can see here, this is the infraorbital fissure, okay, and this is this will communicate with the roof on the lateral side. So the roof is communicating with the infraorbital fissure here, infraorbital fissure. It is the roof of the pterygopalatine fossa communicates, okay. Now let us come to the communications of this very small fossa, okay, very small fossa. And this very small fossa which is here, pterygopalatine fossa, it is important because it communicates with so many structure and contains the important nerves and vessels, okay. Let us see the communication. The communication of this pterygopalatine fossa is with the orbit, and this is, as we have discussed, it is through the infraorbital fissure, okay, through the infraorbital fissure. Now it also communicates, as we have seen, that with the infratemporal fossa here, and this is through the pterygomaxillary fissure. It is through the pterygomaxillary fissure. Then this pterygopalatine fossa also communicates with the middle cranial cavity, okay, middle cranial fossa, okay, and this is through the foramina rotundum. The foramina rotundum will give passage to the maxillary nerve, and this will come into the pterygopalatine fossa through a foramina in the posterior wall of this, okay. So the posterior wall will contain two foramina. One is for the maxillary nerve, which will come here, and then another nerve which will come is the nerve of pterygoid canal. So it is the opening of the pterygoid canal is also in the posterior wall, and we have seen that the posterior wall is formed by the root of pterygoid process and the greater wing of the sphenoid by the anterior surface of the So it is in the anterior surface of these two foramina. They show their opening in the anterior surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid, okay. So maxillary nerve and the nerve of the pterygoid canal, they will come into this fossa, that is pterygopalatine fossa. Now then its communication is also through the foraminal lacerum, as I said, through the nerve of the pterygoid canal gives passage to this, and this communication is through the pterygoid canal. So it communicates with the foraminal lacerum, it communicates with the middle cranial cavity, it communicates with the nasal cavity through the sphenopalatine foramina, through which I have passed the wire. Okay, this will go into the nose through the sphenopalatine foramina, through the medial wall of this fossa. Okay, pterygopalatine fossa. This also communicate with the infratemporal fossa. Okay, through the pterygomaxillary fissure, it communicates with the orbit, with the infraorbital fissure. Let us lastly come to the what are the contents of this very small fossa, pterygopalatine fossa. It contains very important nerve, the maxillary nerve. As I said, that it comes through foramina rotundum to the pterygopalatine fossa. And then this nerve will also show the hanging of the pterygopalatine ganglion. So a ganglion is attached to the maxillary nerve, and it is important ganglion. The pterygopalatine ganglion is present into the pterygopalatine fossa. The maxillary nerve will then pass to the orbit through the infraorbital fissure. Okay, now this will also contain, the fossa will also contain the third part of the maxillary artery. Okay, third part and its branches will be there. So this is a very small fossa, pterygopalatine fossa, which is difficult to, realize all the boundaries. Okay, I cannot show you all. It is very deeply situated, but you will have to learn theoretical. Okay, what are its contents, what are its communication, what are the boundaries of this fossa. Thank you very much for watching a video on to the pterygopalatine fossa.